Hello and welcome. I'm David Hamilton. I first became interested in the issue of the language used to talk about climate change when I became aware of the concern-action gap. If you ask Australians through an opinion survey, for example, whether they are very concerned or concerned about climate change, you'll find that about 70%, give or take a bit, will say they are either very concerned or concerned. That's most of us are either very concerned or concerned about climate change. But how many of us are actually taking action? Well, the key thing that matters, the thing that matters completely, is whether we are reducing our use of polluting fuels like petrol, diesel, gas, coal, and so on, because they're the fuels that are creating the problem in the first place. And as you can see in this graph, while petrol has been going down a bit, diesel has been going up. And in fact, it's been going up faster than petrol has been going down. This is not such good news because diesel is a more polluting fuel than petrol. So there is a gap between concern and action. A lot of concern, no discernible action where it counts. Why? I think it's because of the language that people don't know. They don't understand that it is our use of those fuels like petrol and diesel, gas, commonly called fossil fuels. It is our use of those fuels that is the primary cause of climate change. And they don't know it because they don't hear language that talks to them about it. They hear words like reducing emissions, decarbonisation, a low carbon economy, and fossil fuels. And they don't connect, that language doesn't connect with people. I have no criticism of such unengaged people. English might be their second, third, or fourth language. The information environment inhabited by the social or cultural group may contain very little accurate information on climate change. Their daily lives may be so busy with the simple survival of themselves and their loved ones through precarious employment, precarious housing, precarious health, or all three, that engaging with a technical issue like climate change is simply not something they have time, energy, and brain space to do. So, what evidence is there that the not knowing I'm talking about is the problem? There's a bit of evidence around it. I'm going to focus on just one study because I found its results to be quite dramatic. It was an opinion survey done in, well, it was more than an opinion survey. It was quite a comprehensive survey done in 2022 by Business New South Wales. And they surveyed small businesses, small to medium-sized businesses in those states. And they asked that the people who bought energy for those businesses complete the survey. It was quite a big survey about electricity bills and all sorts of other stuff, but there were some questions about net zero emissions targets. So most of the people who answered the survey had heard of net zero targets. Only 20% had not. But the level of understanding of the impact of net zero targets was low. The survey did the question from two directions. They asked people whether they'd heard of targets but didn't understand the impact of them, and about 40% said, yeah, we've heard about it, but we don't really know what it means. And they also asked whether people were confident that they fully understood the impact of a net zero target of their business. And only 13% of these small business people buying energy for their small businesses actually understood what a net zero target would mean for their business. But there's more. There was actually quite a lot of support for net zero targets, even though people didn't know what to do. So 20% were very supportive, 33%, a third, were supportive, another 33% were neutral. That leaves only 14% who are opposed to net zero targets. So a great deal of support or just people not being sure. And finally, they asked questions about whether businesses had set a target date for achieving net zero in their business. And those who'd set a target date for achieving net zero in their business, but didn't really know what to do, were about half of those who'd set a target date. So what does all this mean? First of all, I think this whole survey is really strong evidence for not knowing. Just people didn't know what was going on. But it also is evidence that people want to do stuff. They want to make a difference. They would like to help make the climate be safer for their children and grandchildren. But they don't know what to do. So if the problem is the language that's used and it doesn't connect with people, then we need better language. And we need that better language from leaders. So what do we want our leaders to do? We want them to speak clearly, directly, and often in a meaningful way. So I think I'll need to focus a little bit firstly on often, because we are talking about unengaged people with such busy lives, and they won't get many climate messages at all. Perhaps they'll hear a few second grab about climate change every few weeks or a few months. So a leader who wants the message to get through needs to talk about this often in the hope that it will get through to people. And we need to talk about, well, the leaders need to talk about things that are related to the people. They need to avoid the language I've talked about, like reducing emissions, decarbonisation, and so on. They need to talk about things that meet the audience where they are. They need to talk about the fuels that people themselves use. So don't talk about coal. Not too many Australians actually burn coal. Talk about petrol and diesel, for example, because that's what people spend money on. They know what those fuels are, so they can relate to the term petrol and diesel. So that's what we need leaders to do, to talk about things like that. So putting that together with some other advice, we end up with this chart. The left-hand column is things not to say. This is the language that doesn't help. I call it obscure and arcane language in another place. Leave that left-hand column alone. Talk about the stuff that's in the right-hand column. You'll notice that most of what's in this right-hand column uses a fairly common form of words. It talks about shifting from polluting fuels, such as petrol, diesel, and gas, to clean energy. Now, this formulation is built on some fantastic work done by the Potential Energy Coalition, who've done market research into climate messaging right across the world. And they've found that talking about moving away from pollution it strikes a much more positive response to people than just stop doing stuff. And they also found that making it a positive message, such as moving to clean energy, and by clean energy, of course, I mean use electricity from renewable sources, that moving to clean energy is more positive. So shift from polluting fuels such as petrol, diesel, gas, and so on, to clean energy. And that's a message which most people will be able to relate to. I really recommend the work of the Potential Energy Coalition. They do fantastic stuff. Incidentally, I've talked about obscure and arcane language and my words and phrases in my left-hand column on this page. They talk about that too. They don't use quite the same examples that I do. They simply say that what people need to do is they need to talk like a human. So if you talk like the left-hand column, as far as Potential Energy Coalition's research is concerned, you are not talking like a human, and you need to change to say stuff like my right-hand column, which is the kind of things that humans talk about as far as their messaging research has shown. So, in conclusion, Australians are concerned about climate change. They don't know what to do to stop making it worse. And the not knowing about the primary role of petrol, diesel, all the fossil fuels, the primary role that those fuels, burning those fuels has with climate change, not knowing about that is a big barrier towards action. So, and we know that because Australians' use of those fuels is not steadily decreasing as needed. I would like to see use of those fuels go down about 10% a year. We're not seeing any reduction at all, really. A little bit of change from petrol to diesel, but overall an increase. In some places in Australia, there are some early signs of reductions in gas usage, which is positive, but they all need to come down. And Australians continuing to buy machines that run on those fuels. Those machines could become stranded assets. We have a video about stranded assets on the Climate Tasmania YouTube channel, and I recommend you have a look at that. Our leaders, whether they're political, business, community, religious, sporting, all sorts of leaders, need to use the kind of appropriate, non-technical language when they talk about climate change to a general audience that I have described. Because if we improve the climate language of leaders, we will help dissipate the fog of not knowing, and that will help Australians to work together for a safer climate. And it will give Australians back some agency. They're worried about climate change, but they don't know what to do. That robs them of agency and adds to their anxiety and distress about the situation. If they understand what's going on better, they will have more agency. Even though the personal circumstances might mean I can't do very much about it right now, at least they know what to do if they're in the position of being able to do something. They will have some agency again. So I commend the change of language to everyone. And thank you for listening.